Pleasure to rise to speak on the Water Catchment Legislation Amendment Bill 2017, and it's really quite astounding that we're 3 years into this government and the word water has not been mentioned by the opposite side, given that water is such an important... No, I've heard, but my colleagues have said quite clearly that it's taken you this long to get organised, and that's no surprise. Given the member for Mordialloc's lack of understanding of the issue and talked so much about nothing for 6 minutes and couldn't even fill a whole 10, not to mention your colleague, the member for Essendon. Clearly neither of you have been outside the tram tracks and I welcome your visit. Come and see the farms, come and see what we contribute and see how important water is to our communities. So it gives me great pleasure to rise and speak on this bill. And I understand the importance of water because we do need water, so we've got good agricultural communities which contribute both to the environmental importance of our state and to the food needs of not only Victoria but the world. So whilst I support the reasoned amendment and I acknowledge the importance of what's happening in the north and the importance of having an impact statement before we go ahead and move a bill, particularly an impact statement on salinity. Incredibly important issues. We shouldn't pass bills that we don't have knowledge on before we do it. But I might just bring the attention back to South West Coast, my electorate, because we have an abundance of water and it's hydrologically tested that our region has good, safe water underground for use in agriculture, of which of the 100% that we have available, environmentally and soundly environmentally available, that's capped at 100%, we're only using 35%. So we propose and have spoken as a region to the department that we get the department to help us enable another 10%, still very environmentally soundly used, and that would improve the productivity of the region enormously. So currently that 35%, if we increase it to another 10%, that would enable a $55 million investment from increased productivity back into the region. And that's done on modelling of increasing grass production, which would then be turned into milk, which would then have a value of $55 million. Now, given we already employ just in the dairy industry alone, and it's not only the dairy industry, the wool industry, the sheep meat industry, the beef industry and the cropping industry can also benefit from the increased irrigation capacity. But dairy alone, we employ over 10,000 people in that industry just in South West Coast. So the value currently of that milk on farm is $192 million, of which 80% gets re-injected straight back into the community, so a figure of $153 million. So if we had just 10% extra that we currently have the legislation in place to be able to do, we just need the Minister to urge the department to actually get on and find ways, and those ways are actually already identified by the great work that the group, Great South Coast, Food and Fibre Group that I was very involved with before coming into this place, have done the modelling on. If we just get that department doing the job that they should be doing, then we would see an extra, that $55 million would equate to another 340 jobs. So every $1 million that is produced in the dairy industry in South West Coast produced 6.17 jobs. So if you put another 55 million in, that's another 340 jobs. So it's very significant. Now that's just one of the things we need to do. We need to enable that extra 10%, and we could obviously do more and still do it very safely from an environmental perspective. But we can also access the Dilwyn Aquifer, which is about 1 kilometre underground. And we've seen schemes like, I've seen them actually in Canada and across the world, but even in Australia, we've seen them in Tasmania, where for a small investment of around that $2 million, you can enable 3 to 20 irrigators along a small scheme, and an ongoing cost very, very insignificant to the government, but increased availability of water, therefore increased productivity. Now, we know we're going to face some challenges as a world producing enough food for a growing population. So I think we have a sense of responsibility to do it, to be able to export food the way we do to the world, and to make sure we do it responsibly. And here are ways where the water exists and the studies are done, and we can do it in a way that increases productivity very effectively. There's also the third point I wanted to make in South West Coast, how we can do better, and we have the ability there already, and that's to allow for what's known as winter run take. And rather than allocating water in the summer to the farmer, allowing them to build dams on their properties and allowing the winter run to go into the dams. So environmentally, it's far better for the river, and in summer there is no take-off because they've already got the water stored. So it's far better for river health as well. So I think what we need to do is not just put a bill in that does very little, but actually get our departments that have the capacity to do things and get them doing them now. And this is a case in point where I know the Great South Coast had a meeting with the Minister just recently to put the case forward. The Food and Fibre Group had a meeting with the Minister to put this case forward. So I urge the Minister to take heed and think about how we can get this going already. Well, the bill also talks about the importance of the Aboriginal community having some input, and I think that's really good because in South West Coast we've got examples of the Budgebim the Budgebim project, which is a project just in the area near north of Portland and west of Warrnambool. And what we see there is for 6,500 years, the Aboriginal community were eeling and using a farming system very similar to what you see today in sheep farming or cattle farming, where you fence and rotationally graze and rest areas. And this is what the Aboriginal community were doing back then. So clearly there was an affinity of understanding of intensive farming way back 6,500 years ago. So it's important to make sure we do the consultation with people who have investments, such as farmers who have been farming in the area for 150 years or 180 years, and the Aboriginal community, some of them have been farming there for 6,500 years. So I do see that we have some important elements to this bill, but I do think it's rather amusing that we have the other side, as mentioned already, standing up and talking for just a few minutes on a subject they have very little knowledge about and can't even fill, as the lead speaker, the 10 minutes allocated to talk about the importance of such an important resource that we must do well and continue to do well, and one we know will be something we must allocate responsibly, and I think we've got opportunity to do that very, very well in the Southwest, as we have been doing for a very long time and want to continue to do as an organised group of producers and community members working with both the shires and councils and farming community, research organisations such as West Vic Dairy, the United Dairy Farmers of Victoria, all working in a way that we get the best out of the region and improve our productivity, profitability, create jobs, take part in the challenge the world has in front of it. I've probably said this in this place before, but in the next 50 years, the amount of food we've produced as an organised community worldwide, we have to produce, in the last 500 years, since we started organised farming practices, before we were just subsistence farmers, when we started organised farming some 500 years ago, we now in the next 50 years have to produce exactly the same amount of food as we've produced in the last 500. And given that we only have about 7% of the world's surface to do that on, and we have increasing population, we're predicted to get to 10 billion people in the next few years, we have a real challenge on our hands. So I think we have a social obligation where people like the community of South West Coast have the ability to produce more responsibly and reliably to do exactly that. So enabling communities, unlocking the latent capacity, I think is what we really need to see our policies providing opportunity for. So I'd rather see a lot more walking the walk. We know food's important. We talk about, white papers for agriculture, but so far talking the talk is about as far as I can see it going. So here's an opportunity. Food and fibre community in South West Coast have answers. The opportunity is there. This bill doesn't even need to pass for that to take place. I urge the Minister to work closely with Food and Fibre community of South West Coast and get the department to get on with servicing their customer, the consumer, rather than standing in the way and making life challenging rather than enabling. And with that, I'll leave it at that.